In 2013, President Obama promised to end the homelessness crisis in a decade by rolling out the Housing First policy that provides permanent housing with no strings attached. Now, 12 years later, the problem has only exploded nationwide, increasing by 35%.
President Trump is hoping to reverse those trends with his executive order to crack down on crime and disorder in America's streets and force progressive cities to apply more effective policies.
In this episode, we sit down with an expert who literally wrote the book on how we can actually confront and begin to correct course on the homelessness crisis. I'm Daily Wire Executive Editor John Bickley with Georgia Howe. This is a weekend edition of Morning Wire.
Here's something you don't see every day. Doctors running a Black Friday sale. But that's exactly what's happening at Brickhouse Nutrition, and honestly, it's kind of a big deal. They're doing 30% off everything. That's their biggest sale of the year. And we're talking about legitimately impressive stuff here. There's Lean, which is the doctor-formulated weight loss supplement. It's designed for people who want real results without having to deal with injections. I always tell people you don't notice until you do. Lean really keeps you out of the kitchen. I know, because when I take it, I'm spending a lot more time working and less time looking for snacks in the Daily Wire kitchen. Then there's Creatone. Creatine that's actually made specifically for women. It helps you look more lean and more toned without having to add a bunch of extra workouts or restrictive dieting to your routine. And get this, Field of Greens is the only superfruit and vegetable drink that's been shown in an actual university study to help slow aging. Plus, everything else they make, better sleep products, superior collagen, all of it is 30% off right now. The catch? These deals won't stick around forever. Black Friday prices move pretty fast. Head over to brickhousesale.com and grab 30% off while it's still available. Again, that's brickhousesale.com for 30% off.
Joining us now is Michele Steeb, author of Answers Behind the Red Door, Battling the Homeless Epidemic. Michele, thanks for coming on.
Oh, really looking forward to our discussion, John.
So let's start with how the federal government has approached homelessness. We want to look at this big picture first before we zoom into some of these cities. It's been driven by a concept known as housing first. For our audience's sake, can you explain what housing first exactly is?
Sure. And if I can step back a little bit further with context, up until a couple decades ago, homelessness was really addressed by the faith-based community, right? The federal government really wasn't very involved, but as they have in many other issue areas, they've slowly crept into becoming the largest funder of homelessness. And because of that, they drive policy. Up until about 12 years ago, the federal government funded shelters, they funded transitional housing, they funded mental health and drug and alcohol treatment along with that housing. They funded a little bit of permanent housing too, and we're going to talk about permanent housing here in a second, but they really funded a variety of programs. And it was within the Obama administration in 2013 to be specific, that they said, you know what, we're only going to fund one thing now. And that one thing is housing subsidies, housing vouchers. We are not going to fund mental health treatment or drug and alcohol treatment or employment training. And we're going to offer this housing to the homeless, this subsidized housing for life with no conditions. None whatsoever. So no requirement to engage in treatment ever, no requirement to work ever, no requirements. And this was rolled out without any evidence that it would work as a one-size-fits-all approach. It was designed for a very small segment of the homeless population, the chronically homeless. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. But it was designed for this small segment. But without any evidence, the Obama administration rolled it out. He literally promised it would end homelessness in 10 years. And 10 years later, 12 years later exactly, we are at the highest point ever in our nation's history, an almost 35% increase. And the reasons for this we can talk about, but primarily, human beings need to be productive. They need to have purpose. And this policy, this approach has completely flies in the face of that. They never need to work ever. They never need to do anything to participate in their lives. And that's not how we are at our best. And this approach has just massively failed. And thankfully, the Trump administration has stepped in and said, we are at the federal level, we need to reprioritize mental health treatment, drug and alcohol counseling. It needs to be offered in conjunction with housing, in multiple forms of housing. And we need to clear these encampments because these encampments have become so dangerous, not just for the individuals living in them. Pets are now overdosing, women are being trafficked, and there's spillover effects to the general public that have been devastating, including the pollution of rivers, the inability to go to parks because you're not safe, the stepping over of needles, as you walk to school with your kids. It has been a disaster on every level.
So you say there's been a 35% overall increase in homelessness. And from what I've read, it's concentrated in some certain areas like San Francisco, for example. How is that, how do we see it distributed across the country in terms of homelessness rates?
Well, let me say that California, so again, federal government adopted Housing First as a one-size-fits-all approach in 2013. California is the only state in the nation that followed the feds and said, all of our money, on top of all of your money, federal government, is now going to go to Housing First. California has experienced a 40% increase since 2016 when they adopted this, actually since 2017. So it's been California now has almost 50% of the nation's unsheltered population, almost 40% of the overall homeless population. Its cities have been ravaged by this. San Francisco is really, with Mayor Lurie starting to clean it up. Mayor Matt Mahan, and San Jose is really working to clean it up despite this mandate from the Governor Newsom, saying that all he is going to fund with the state dollars is Housing First, which has massively failed the state, the nation, these cities. It's just a mess.
So there you have progressive city mayors battling with the progressive governor to actually have more conservative, if you will, policies. Is this correct? I mean, so we actually have a battle where the governor is more liberal than the most liberal of mayors in the country.
Well, you could characterize it that way. I would say it's a battle of effectiveness, right? These mayors are sick and tired of, saying to their constituents, this is what you're going to get. This is all you're going to get. And these mayors, thankfully, understand that they need to prioritize treatment and recovery and clear these encampments. And we're going to see a lot of headway with them and in partnership with the federal government.
Now, you've highlighted severe cases of homelessness as a major issue and something that people are really wrestling with. How do you actually address this? What are some solutions?
Let me just say, within the homeless population, and by the way, we're talking about somewhere around 2.6 million Americans, even though HUD says it's about 900,000. We can get into that a little bit later. But within the homeless population, about 80% are struggling with either mental illness and or addiction. They're also struggling within the female population, about 70% domestic violence, criminal histories. Even the female population, in the program I ran for 13 years, about 68% of our women had criminal histories, largely because in order to feed their families or themselves, or grab a blanket or a shower, they had to commit crimes. And so criminal histories and lack of high school diploma and education. But the primary illnesses that accompany homeless are mental illness, and addiction. And so on top of mental illness and addiction, if you are struggling with those things, there's also a disease of the brain, as is classified by CDC. By the way, addiction and mental illness they're diseases of the brain. CDC has labeled them that for decades. On top of those two, many of the homeless are also struggling with another disease of the brain called anosognosia. It's actually a deficit of self-awareness. So they don't know how sick they are, which is why they are, you hear them say, oh, I like it out here. If you think about it, When all of these people that are struggling with homelessness were in first grade, and the first grade teacher said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Not one of them, I would lay down on railroad tracks over this. Not one of them raised their hand and said, "What I'm doing right now." Right? They took a wrong turn, a series of wrong turns. They're very sick. They don't know how sick they are, and that is why this executive order by President Trump is so important, because what he is saying is we need to use civil commitment to get them into treatment, to help them gain clarity around the diseases that they're struggling with, and to help them heal and progress. And so you cannot expect this population, which is about 10 to 20% of the overall homeless population, you cannot expect them to raise their hand and say, "I want help." Some might, but there's a study out of Boston that followed the chronically homeless, struggling again with mental illness and addiction, that were placed in housing uh, that could ask for services if they wanted those services. In 5 years, nearly half of the cohort died because their issues were so severe, and they weren't those diseases that go untreated get worse, right? Cardiovascular disease, cancer, all diseases that go untreated get worse. And that's what happened with this population. It's the only long-term study that's been done so far. But this president is turned the battleship in the right direction. We need to lead these people into recovery and treatment. And it's best for them. It's best for the general public. It's best for our environment. It's best for their pets. It's best for women. It's best for everyone.
You said, lead them to treatment. There's also compulsive elements here for extreme cases. Can you walk us through what is this executive order? How does it actually play out in real life? How does this work on the local level?
So it's very new. So we're just starting. DC is kind of one of the first examples that we can point to. It's still going on in DC, so we don't have a lot of results yet. But what the president is saying is, if with federal funding, we are going to reprioritize mental health treatment and drug and alcohol counseling in combination with more transitional housing environments. We don't need to give everyone struggling with homelessness a house for life. We don't have to do that. We don't have the housing stock to do it anyway, and didn't when we put this policy in place. But we need to reprioritize federal funding to ensure mental health treatment and drug and alcohol treatment are provided. We need to clear encampments. And in order for communities to continue to receive those federal dollars, they need to be clearing encampments. They're not safe for the people living in them. They're not safe for the general public, as we discussed earlier. And so we watched in DC the encampments being cleared. We don't have any data yet on where people went and how many are in treatment and have stayed in treatment. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of that data. But even if the data isn't as fantastic, at the onset, once people understand that there's accountability, that they need to have accountability in the system, communities do, individuals who are struggling with homelessness do, they're going to it's going to start to really have a ripple effect. But it's way better, no matter what the data shows, it's way better than what's been happening to our cities over the last, and to our people. By the way, there's a 77% increase in the death rate amongst the homeless population under this policy.
Incredible.
It's just been horrible.
How tragic.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, this needs to be, maybe this is my final question here, this needs to be coupled with an approach to law enforcement and to the criminal justice system that is more stringent than we've seen in a lot of these cities. Think of San Francisco, Los Angeles, where there's really lax application of the law. Does this executive order do anything to address that, or is that going to be something that has to be, sort of coupled with other policies?
Oh, it absolutely does. It says if a community, so again, the federal government's the largest funder of homelessness, and they distribute most of that money to local governments to address homelessness. And if a local government does not enforce the clearing of encampments and no camping laws or camping bans, they will lose federal funding. It absolutely addresses this, and thankfully, has some really big teeth.
That's good to hear. Michele, thank you so much for joining us. It's very informative. Appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
That was Michele Steeb, author of Answers Behind the Red Door, and this has been a weekend edition of Morning Wire.